Managing a rental property should be easy, right? You buy a house, someone else pays to live in it, and boom, you are a property model. Until you realize you've basically adopted a bunch of grown children who may or may not pay the rent on time. Sarina Gibbon is the General Manager of the Auckland Property Investors Association, and you need to watch this if your goal is to get financial freedom faster.
Financial freedom faster. Financial freedom faster.
If you like making money rather than watching everyone else do it, hit the subscribe button and get ahead because this is New Zealand's fastest growing real estate and investment show. Whether you are a new investor or a seasoned pro, Sarina Gibbon has information you need to know to get ahead. She has seen it all in 17 years in the industry. Now, Sarina, how do you stop your rental from becoming a horror show?
You stop your rental from becoming a horror show by taking management and RTA compliance very seriously rather than an afterthought. So you started your introduction by talking about managing tenancies being quite easy. Yeah. It is easy, but behind that, that facade of ease and comfort and straightforwardness is there has to be really good systems in place to support your everyday business management.
I think that's a great way to start, Sarina, because I see new investors wanting to do everything on their own. And I think today we're going to learn that it's not as easy as we think. And I know some changes have been made last year, and can you comment a bit more on what's happening this year that's going to change the scenario?
Sure. So at the end of 2024, Parliament passed the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act, and with that is going to bring in a whole bunch of changes with tenancy laws in New Zealand. And how they are going to manage the change process is it's being phased out in four distinctive phases and being rolled out in four distinctive phases. So we're currently in phase 2. Come the 20th of March, there's going to be new laws that are going to be effective, and towards the end of the year or early next year, to be decided, the precise date, we're going to see pets being allowed into rental properties. So the key thing to be really mindful of for your listeners is knowing that there are some really big changes with residential tenancy law in New Zealand that's happening right at this moment. Most of us are very aware of the 90-day no-fault termination being returned to the landlord's toolkit. I will say the fish hook to be really, really careful of there is, on the face of it, it does look like 90-day no-fault termination is going to make life so easy for landlords and property managers, right? But allied with that change is also the broadening of protection for tenants against retaliatory termination. Okay?
So it's not as simple as we think face value, because you mentioned like a few changes will be happening. And I know that in the past, we couldn't have a no-cause termination, and now it sounds like it's coming back, but it's not as simple as it sounds. So what is happening there in that specific change? What entails?
I think the massive red flag that red flags I'm looking for out there are things like, if you're a property manager or you yourself are sitting on a pile of tenants' names that you're just waiting for the 90-day no-fault to come back in order to hand out those notices like lollies, that's something you should probably pause on and have a deeper look into. If you are if you presume that the 90-day no-fault termination is going to give you greater power over the tenant, especially vis-a-vis legitimate complaints from tenants or requests from tenants to have their properties remedies, to have maintenance carried out, to have review a copy of the rent summary in a timely manner, all those things that tenants are entitled to ask for under the law. And if you're wanting to make all these little hassles go away by just giving a 90-day no-fault termination, I would say you are more likely than not to be caught by the retaliatory termination net. So I think we all know about the 90-day no-fault termination. What's not being talked about enough is the fact that under Section 54, which is retaliatory termination, the application window for tenants has gone up from 28 days to 12 months from the time they receive the termination notice. So the bar to apply against you is so much lower. The maximum penalty is $6,500. It's quite high. And one of the effects of an order of retaliatory termination is that the termination notice itself will be set aside. So imagine being in a forced marriage where you're trying to leave, but the tenancy tribunal is saying, no, you got to coexist in this tenancy with this tenant. You don't want to keep for a set period of time. You cannot give any more termination notices. So I think that's going to be pretty significant. So for anyone out there listening, if they're thinking about defaulting to the 90-day no-fault termination every single time to get out of a periodic tenancy, I really caution that way of thinking, and I really encourage them to just take their RTA compliance and knowledge a lot more seriously than that.
So you're mentioning that the 90 days is now changing, but how about the tenant? Because previously you would give them 90 days and they would come back with 21 or 28, but now it's slightly different.
Yeah. So previously the no-fault termination notice period for tenants was 28 days. Now it's down to 21 days. And it's just a minor tweak there to acknowledge that in certain instances, a periodic tenancy really just needs to be as flexible as possible to support the changing intents of the parties involved.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also for the landlord, it's important then to understand those time frames, because if you give a 90 days notice and let's say they're planning to sell the house, the tenant can potentially leave in 21 days now, and then you have to plan for that period that you don't have any tenants. But that's just, part of the process of, taking ownership of the house back. Now, obviously, so the 90 days are being reduced now to 42 for landlord. Full course termination. And for tenants from 28 to 21.
Yes, correct.
Yes. So you mentioned there before about the pets. What's happening? Because I know a lot of people get very, very, not everyone in New Zealand owns a home. Many people rent and they want to have a pet. So what's changing?
So what is coming in, and we don't have a start date yet, believe it or not, it's all because of this whole damn pet bond issue. Because at the moment, the Tenancy Bond Centre is going through this massive digital transformation project where they're changing the bond system from a paper system to a fully digital and self-service system. Okay. And this system has no ability to collect, account for, and release a separate pet bond. So that we're waiting for the technology to happen
to catch up
before we can have an actual rollout date for the pet provisions. But the good news there for the industry is we potentially have as long as a 1-year runway for everyone to make really good plans and changes to start accommodating pets at the rental property. So what the change is really about is giving, for the first time ever, tenants in New Zealand will have a rebuttable presumptive right to have pets at the rental property. So no longer are we going to be able to have clauses in our tenancy agreement that just simply says, no, that's going to change. You are going to, as a landlord, you are going to have some degree of control and ability to limit the way what sort of pets that your tenants can have, the way they conduct themselves, so on and so forth. But the more broadly, the intent of the policy is to make it easier for tenants to have pets and enjoy their lives as they would if they're an owner-occupier.
So when you say pet bond, I'm just thinking what the listener will be trying to understand. Is there a fixed amount? Does the landlord decide how much the pet bond is going to be? Or is it something else completely?
From the rollout date, the maximum pet bond collectible will be 2 weeks rent. And that is in addition to the maximum 4 weeks of general bond. We're just going to call the bond that we collect and manage and release now. It's just going to be renamed as the general bond. And then there's a separate pet bond you can collect of up to 2 weeks rent. Very importantly, I think landlords out there need to realize that we're talking about one bond per tenancy. We're not talking about one bond per pet. So 1 Rottweiler, 2 weeks bond, or up to 2 weeks bond. 3 Rottweilers, 2 weeks bond, because it's one tenancy.
Double the damage, but
you don't. I mean, you're not. No one is making you consent to 3 Rottweilers. I just want to put it out there.
Yeah.
You got to be reasonable. You have to consider the tenant's request to have a pet. You have to have valid reasons to decline, and you can put in reasonable conditions as well. So I think there's a lot of flexibilities there for landlords to mitigate the potential risk when it comes to pets.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of mom and dad investors, they are just starting on their journey. It can sound quite scary for them. But to be honest, there are many tenants out there, they do have pets and they look after the property, and that pet bond should give you the extra peace of mind. But as you're saying, it's negotiable and it's about being reasonable as well,
Yes.
which is really interesting. But do you think that mum and dad investors will feel a bit, put off by this new law, and then they'll decide, I don't want to invest in property anymore? Do you think that's going to happen?
I think at the end of the day, the fundamentals of property investment hasn't changed, right? You're looking at the numbers on the market, you're looking at supply demand imbalance, you're looking at potential capital gain growth, your cash flow. Those things are not going to change. I think the day-to-day vis-a-vis pets is going to change. And look, every time we do something, we introduce a new piece of legislation within tenancy law in New Zealand, we get all the landlords jumping up and down going, this is going to put rents up, this is going to be the end of tenancy, this is, like the government's going to own all the rentals. Let's see 17 years later, now that you've exposed my vintage. That's just absurd. It's not going to happen. Yeah. Okay, so are landlords very worried? Yes, I think so. But I do think those concerns stem out of uncertainty and a sense of disruption, right? So I think as much as possible, I do say to people, as much as possible, limit the psychological effects of disruption and uncertainty and fear in your head. And just embrace the very likely possibility that change could also bring about a lot of opportunities. We know for sure, we do lots of industry data that points to tenants with pets stay in the rental longer. They pay slightly higher in market rent, so you're returning better. We have some anecdotal data across the APIA community that tenants with pets do return the property at a higher standard. Sometimes it's out of their own free will. Sometimes it's part of the condition of having pets in the first place is to return the property at a higher standard. So, I do think if we lean into those opportunities, long term, my expectation and my hope for your, so-called ma and pa investors is that they will be more embracing of pets.
A reminder, if you missed out on cheap houses in the 90s, don't miss out on the best property investing advice in New Zealand. Subscribe now and make up for lost time. So, Sarina, we were talking about pets and how that can, impact some of the newer investors. But I love your approach because, again, I see this as an opportunity, and data shows that people that have pets, more often than not, they will look after the property really well. So beyond the pets and the timeframes that have changed, can we expect any other changes that landlords should be aware of?
There are a bunch of other changes with the RTA Amendment Act. And for those landlords and property managers, if you haven't already attended an industry training or read up on the materials, I really encourage you to do that. Another thing that is that get the training rooms really fired up when I go up and down the country talking about these laws is that from the 20th of March onwards, clauses that specifically prohibit tenants from smoking indoors at the rental property will be enforceable.
Okay.
There are a few exceptions there, a few fish hooks there to be aware of. So when they say smoking, the provision relates specifically to smoked tobacco products under the Smoke-Free Environments and Regulated Products Act.
Okay, that's very specific.
Long-winded way of saying it doesn't cover vaping. Okay, so the confirmation that these clauses are enforceable is silent on vaping, which I get asked about everywhere I go.
Which is a fair concern, obviously.
Fair concern. I would, however, and also after we talk about vaping, people start asking me about marijuana. Okay. So for this particular provision, we're just talking about smoking smoked tobacco products. So it's like your cigarette, your cigar, I don't know, do people even still smoke pipes?
Maybe they do.
Anything you need to light. Yeah. Anything you need to combust or ignite, you need to light. You can have a clause in your tenancy agreement prohibiting your tenants from smoking indoors those products, and it would be on the face of it enforceable as far as the tribunal is concerned. Now, the one thing I would say is just because the provision is silent on smokeless tobacco products such as vaping, or things like marijuana, it doesn't mean you are prohibited from putting some kind of limitations on your tenants. Because fundamentally, we go back to Section 11 of the RTA, which is about contracting out of the RTA, and it requires that all the tenancy clauses be consistent with the RTA. So if you have a clause in there that limits your tenant's ability to vape, as long as it's consistent, it doesn't infringe on their right to quiet enjoyment, all that sort of stuff, you're fine. So another thing is if you want to stop your tenant from smoking cigarettes outdoors, and let's say you're in an apartment complex and there are body corporate rules that prohibits occupants from smoking in a common area and outdoors on the premises, then that itself would be part of the tenancy agreement, right? In terms of marijuana, the tenant is prohibited under Section 40 to conduct or carry out illegal activities on the premises. So
there are other
yeah, I think sometimes when I talk to especially professional property managers whose job is to read the RTA, is to understand and interpret it and apply it, there's this propensity of being too down in the weeds that they forget there are all these other provisions and freedom for them to explore in order to maximize their ability to look after the rental property that's under the tenant's care.
What I'm really learning from you today, Sarina, is there are a lot of details on the RTA that you should be aware of. And, I still talk to a lot of, as I mentioned before, new investors. They want to go ahead and do everything themselves. But we always say that property investing is a business and you should account for a property manager to do the job for you. So if there's one thing that anyone can take away from, this podcast today is always have a property manager alongside you to make sure that you're not missing anything. Would you? Because I assume that if you're not compliant, can you comment on some of the fees or, the consequences of someone trying to do it themselves?
Sure. So we just saw this week from the news that I think it's safe to call this person a landlord who got investigated by the tenancy compliance and investigations team. I think the fine is $30,000 in the end. So it's really significant if you get it absolutely wrong, right? It could really derail your cash flow position and your cash flow plan. I will go back to your comment around working with property manager. I absolutely endorse the idea of outsourcing management if you are not confident enough to navigate all these very intricate interplays between the different provisions of the RTA. Because, any Muppet can read the RTA. That's easy. That's easy enough, right? But it's understanding how each provision plays with each other and how it applies and how do you maximize your outcome using these explore these tensions between these provisions and maximize your outcome. That's the art of it. The reality with the property management industry in New Zealand is, unfortunately, it's an unregulated industry, which means there's no benchmarking, there's no unified standard as to what is an appropriate and satisfactory property manager. So when you are out there looking for a property manager, make sure that you're talking with your usual advisors who have really good business network, and make sure you are leaning into your local property investors association. They're just full of landlords who are working with property managers, and do your due diligence to find the best property manager out there who is, the last thing you want is you don't want a property manager that you're going to have to end up managing yourself every single day, because what's the point?
100%. Don't see a property manager as a cost. It's an investment on your property investing business. Thank you so much, Sarina, for sharing your knowledge today. A pleasure. And just a reminder, the biggest investors, the most successful landlords, and the people making serious money in real estate aren't waiting for someone to spoon-feed them information. They are here getting the insights first. Subscribe now and make sure you are one of them.
More cash, passive income coming fast. Make your money work for you. Live the dream, it's overdue. So don't just wait, take control.